small things like pottery, like the shape of the amphorae found on old Egyptian or Greek or Roman ships, can divulge tons of information about trade routes and how different ancient civilizations interacted with each other. So, using the tools and everything that we use to find that stuff, like sonar, different profiles, mapping the underwater environment with magnetometers and all that stuff, and then going through the excavation and the salvage work of bringing back and preserving and photographing and documenting artifacts has done tremendous strides for our understanding of the ancient world and sort of where we came from as a species. So.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, there's a recent story I was reading about where there was a Dutch trading ship that was, before there were banks, right? The transactions of banking happened over the seas, right? So if you wanted to, move money, you had to literally move money, and that happened in the sea, all right, on a boat. And so there were a lot of these treasury ships that left port and sank for one reason or another. And there's one in particular, a Dutch treasury ship that had sunk and hadn't been discovered for years. And they discovered it. And of course, there's these two aspects. There's kind of and we should get into this a little bit. There's kind of the underwater archaeological perspective of trying to understand it. And then there's the treasure hunting perspective. And there were both of these perspectives represented. And although I think the maybe the techniques and tools and even some of the diving is similar in those two things, I think the philosophy and maybe the intent is different. And so they were talking about, recovering all of these coins. They found it, they found, pieces of it and things, and based on the cannons that were still there and so on and so forth. And what they uncovered was they did find, the proper coins that were supposed to be on the boat. But then they also started finding all these other coins, and they were asking the question, well, why are all these other coins here? And as they started to dig through this and understand it more and more, they found, that it was a confirmation of kind of a myth that had existed in the historical understanding of this type of trade, that there was a black market for coins, because the coins were worth much more, almost double, when you got to the East Indies from the Netherlands, than they were at the Netherlands. And so they would take coins from friends and family and then use those coins to buy spices and other things, and then bring those spices back across and then sell the spices for double and basically double your coins. It was a common practice, apparently. And they found, because of the location of them all, that it was kind of ubiquitous across the crew. So whether you were crew, captain, officers, whatever it would be, that everybody was involved in this practice of kind of this black market coin trade that existed. And that all came from uncovering and recovering this wreck with these coins. And so, I mean, that's kind of just a kind of anecdotal story of the contribution of our understanding of history and where we came from, that underwater archaeology contributes to, that I think is really, really cool and helps us, make sense of our past, our history, connect some dots that maybe are, myths or things that we didn't know. And as the old saying says, there's nothing new. History repeats itself, right? It's a cycle. And so hopefully you get better. We get better as a species every time we do it. And that's part of the evolution of us. So I think it's a huge piece. I mean, history, obviously, and archaeology in general plays a huge role. But now, like you say, on being underwater is so new in the grand scheme of things, that a lot of these sites, a lot of these discoveries are still virgin, are still complete. We just don't know what's there. And so that's a really interesting field.
Yep. And before we go back on, I guess, like the treasure hunting aspect of it, there's a huge difference between treasure hunting and archaeology. And a lot of people call themselves like amateur archaeologists, but they don't really go through the scientific method of kind of contributing to understanding of, history and all that. And a lot of if you take something off of a shipwreck, like it's gone. You may not think it's very significant now, but 100 years, 200 years from now, you might have an archaeologist that wants to go down there and look at the shipwreck and not realize why that wreck is missing a porthole off the side of it, or why the bell is missing. And you've destroyed, or at least maybe not necessarily destroyed, but you've hidden a piece of history from the future understanding of people that are going to study us, if
Right.
that makes sense. And so there's a long-term consequence to pillaging shipwrecks and taking treasure and treasure hunting. And artifacts are it's kind of, I don't want to say it's like public property, but the knowledge that comes with studying history and artifacts and archaeology and understanding ourselves, that is knowledge that does belong to the public. And by taking that and treasure hunting and destroying that evidence, you take away from future generations understanding of what it was like to actually be us,
Mhm.
which is a sad thing when you think about it.
Yeah,
I don't want to be forgotten. I don't want to just be some piece of dust in the wind for
oh,
future.
Greg, I'll always remember you. Don't worry.
Aw.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing, right? Because how do you balance these two things? Because there is a feeling like I discovered it, right?
Mhm.
And it's there for the taking. So I think about like, the famous, wrecks and things, the China fever that existed out on,
Like
the
the
Doria
Northeast
and
divers and
Northeast divers, all these things, right? The Wahoo, all these stories that come out. And there is, this kind of an artifact of my dive, right?
mm,
Even at your local dive site in the quarry or in the lake or wherever it would be, bringing back a little bit of treasure, a little bit of that underworld, even if it's a shell, or something like that. People are attracted to that.
mhm.
There's even these bags and things to go and get stuff, right? And so, how do you balance those two things? What has historical relevance, and what doesn't, and how do you navigate those two sides of the coin versus, the treasure hunting and what has archaeological or historical relevance? I think is a tough nut to crack, and for the average, dummy like me, my rule is I just don't take anything because I don't know, what I
Mhm.
mean, and so like I'm not going to touch it. But there are others that are more knowledgeable. There are others that have a different motivation possibly than I do. So I don't know what's your thoughts there, because I'm not sure if I have an opinion. I just don't know enough to have one yet. There, but you do.
Um, I mean, it's an opinion. If you're going to take something from a dive site, if you're going to take more than pictures and leave more than bubbles, you should be doing it through a scientific methodology that is attributed to some sort of preservation and better understanding of whatever you're taking from. So if you work with, because you don't have to be you don't have to be an archaeologist to do underwater archaeology stuff. There are plenty of like internships, and there's ways to volunteer and work for non-for-profits that properly go through methodology of doing good science and good history. So if you're going to be a part of, taking stuff off of wrecks and, keeping it or donating it to a museum or whatever, doing it the right way scholastically through a true archaeological study or historical study and documenting it and taking those artifacts and preserving them and putting them in a place that they can be of continued use, like in a museum or in a library or wherever, wherever source that people can look to for knowledge. I think that's probably the best way to do it. If you want to get into treasure hunting, put a moral or ethical code behind it and do it for a good reason. And maybe they'll put your name on a plaque somewhere in front of the exhibit, and then you'll get your little dive artifact
There you
associated.
go.
Yeah.